Margaret Renas. And Margaret is with Delta Institute in Chicago. Margaret is their environmental engineer at Delta. She is responsible for project management and implementation of sustainability-related projects, including energy efficiency, programs in the commercial and industrial sectors, waste management initiatives, for example, management of construction and demolition debris and electronic waste. She works with their sustainability planning and environmental management systems. So I'd like to introduce Margaret then as our speaker, and she'll be discussing a recent project they've completed on reducing electronic waste through purchasing decisions. And that project actually was funded by ISTC, and I'm sure she'll discuss that with you. So thank you, Margaret. If you want to just clip that on.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. All right, just want to test this out real quick. Point it, at that, okay. We'll get there. We'll try it when I get there. Again, good morning, my name is Margaret Renas. I'm an environmental engineer for the Delta Institute in Chicago. Delta is a nonprofit organization, an environmental nonprofit, whose mission is to promote economic development that is environmentally sustainable. About a year ago, we were funded by ISTC to explore for businesses if their amounts of e-waste could be reduced or more effectively managed through purchasing strategies on the front end and through more effective recycling strategies on the back end. And so I will be talking today about that year-long project. On three main focus areas. The first is disrupting the energy status quo. So that involves working on energy efficiency with businesses and manufacturers and municipalities, and also working with renewable energy and promoting renewable energy. Our second focus area is transforming waste from liability to asset, which this project fits nicely into. And the third focus area is catalyzing ecosystem stewardship, which focuses on natural resources. So when we talk about e-waste or electronic waste, what exactly is it? Electronics basically near the end of their useful life. So we're talking about laptops, desktops, cell phones, printers, fax machines, television sets. And for businesses, as we all know, we use electronics every day on our jobs, and businesses are large creators of electronic waste as they go through refresh cycles. Oftentimes, every 3 to 5 years, computers are turned over. Some other features about e-waste. E-waste may contain hazardous materials, so chemicals like cadmium, chromium, arsenic, lead, flame retardants, and these contaminants can be harmful to the environment if they are not treated effectively at the end life of electronics. Another feature of electronic waste is it may contain valuable materials. Materials like palladium, silver, gold, and plastic and glass, items that have value and can be recycled and put back as commodities into the production stream. Why does management of e-waste matter? So within this last decade, we are producing electronic waste or e-waste at ever-increasing amounts. We're on iPhone 4 now, I think. How many people here, by show of hands, have iPhone, is it 4? Are we on 4? iPhone 5, I'm sure, is just around the corner. We keep turning over electronics more and more quickly. Laptops, we've gone from desktops to laptops to tablets. And so we just keep producing more and more electronic waste. And it's important to manage this waste, number one, because it helps conserve natural resources. So some of those components of electronics, like the heavy metals that go into them, those are mined. And in some cases, like in the Congo, we have the 3 T's that go into cell phones: tin, tungsten, and tantalum. I think those are the right names. And so in the Congo, the mining of these materials and the sale of these materials is fueling some of the conflict there. Also in mining operations, some of the byproducts of the production processes, the extraction processes, are polluting rivers, streams, water bodies, and killing fish populations and creating damage to human health. Another reason why e-waste is important to manage is it keeps those potentially harmful materials out of our environment. So when we produce electronics, the emissions contain contaminants. They end up in our airstream. When it rains, they end up in our bodies of water, eventually into our food. If we choose to deposit electronics into landfills, municipal solid waste landfills, while heavily regulated now, are not designed for the heavy metals that are currently in our electronics. And there is some evidence already that some of these heavy metals are starting to slowly leach out of our landfills. Now, those leachate amounts are small, but over time, as we're putting more and larger volumes of e-waste into landfills, we could see some of those heavy metals leaching into our soil. And of course, by effectively controlling these contaminants, we're protecting human health. In addition, when you disassemble electronics, if that's not done correctly, you can be liberating some contaminants. So many of our electronics in the last decade have been shipped to developing countries like China. And when you disassemble some electronics, you can liberate lead dust, and that creates a particulate cloud at low levels. And we've seen significant lead poisoning from children in China from this improper disassembly of electronics. And ultimately, it just keeps electronics out of our declining landfill space. It's a NIMBY situation. No one wants a landfill in their backyard. So why do we want to fill up landfills with materials that are readily recyclable? And many electronics can be 98% recyclable. So what's the status in Illinois? In January of 2012, the landfill ban went into place, and a lot of people aren't really aware of that. It's actually illegal to throw away your electronics in the garbage. We also had more stringent features of manufacturer take-back programs, which requires manufacturers to take back their electronics from businesses and recycle these. And unfortunately, though, our recycle rate for electronics is still pretty low, and there are lots of tons waiting to be liberated. I would hazard to guess there are a lot of people here who have old cathode ray tube television sets in their basement or cell phones in their desk drawers. I know I do. So what we've been tasked with by ISTC and our project objective was to study private Illinois companies and determine if we could figure out what are some of the best management practices out there to manage e-waste or to manage electronics, and what are the recycling strategies, and what are the barriers that are out there for these best management practices. And then we wanted to create some strategies to break through those barriers. So if we can marry effective purchasing decisions on what type of electronics we purchase with managing them effectively, recycling them effectively, we have an effective e-waste management system. So our project methodology had 6 steps, and I'll go through each of these in turn. We established an advisory committee to help guide us through our project and provide advice. We did some preliminary research looking at technical journal articles and relevant websites to see if we could educate ourselves a little more and understand maybe what some of those barriers already are. Then we created a survey which we distributed to Illinois companies. We analyzed that survey and conducted some drill down interviews to get at better information. And then from that we identified what our key barriers were to the best management practices, and we created a strategy and tested that strategy. Our advisory committee. So we had 9 members on our advisory committee. It met 5 times during the project, and we had a distribution of private companies like Motorola and Blue Cross sitting on our advisory committee, as well as some nonprofit organizations like the Northeast Recycling Council and CNT. And also some universities, ISTC sat on our advisory committee as well, and some electronics recyclers. So we had a good cross-section of stakeholders to whom management of electronics is important and received some very good guidance. We then conducted some initial secondary research. This was our preliminary research to try to identify what others have discovered out there. And we found 3 main points. Number 1, there seems to be an awareness issue around some of the certifications that really represent, using these can represent best management practices. I have up there Energy Star. Most people probably have heard of Energy Star, but I'm not sure how many folks have heard of EPEAT. That's the Electronic Products Environmental Assessment Tool. And this is a purchasing certification that can allow us to purchase electronics that have some very desirable features that make them recyclable. A second thing we found out, there's a lot of perceptions around these certifications, a lot of negative perceptions. And the third thing is for companies that don't use these certifications and choose to vet electronics on their own, there's a lot of need out there. We also took a look at some other strategies besides recycling, like reduce, reuse, and repurchase. So we used that to guide the creation of our survey. So Delta created the content for this survey, and there were about 22 questions, and they involved various question threads. So based on how respondents answered, it would take them through various threads so we could drill down to really understand what the barriers were. We also required design assistance, which we received from the University of Illinois Survey Research Lab, who were fantastic. And what we learned about surveys is that you don't know what you don't know. And they really helped us to create a very dynamic survey with questions that could be easily understood, a survey where respondents could quickly move through the survey through looking at various techniques for developing questions and responses. We distributed the survey to over 2,600 Illinois companies. Delta used its own email list of businesses that we've worked with, and we also relied on some relationships with folks like DCEO, IFMA, the Facilities Management Association, and some businesses downtown, for instance, Prudential Plaza. Relationship with the facility manager there led to him distributing the survey to all the tenants in the building. And so what we received back were 54 completed surveys, and we did have to call out a few of the surveys. There were some public entities that were on some of the mailing lists that we didn't realize, and we called them out because they're a little different than private companies, subject to different restrictions, regulations. So we ended up with 34, which is not a huge number, and especially going through some of the question threads. What we found out is threads that we thought would be highly visited, sometimes there might have been only 3 or 4 respondents. So what ended up happening is that we couldn't really identify statistically significant differences because our sample size was small. So we consulted with the U of I Survey Research Lab, and what we decided on was to look for substantive differences, substantial differences, as opposed to a hard statistical analysis. And then we interviewed 9 companies out of the 34 respondents. And these are some of the things that we found that we tried to drill down on a little more in the interviews. So we found that one of the best management practices could be having a sustainability plan in place or a green purchasing contract. That can really lead to best practices. We wanted to look a little more at this awareness issue because our survey results were showing that that was the main thread that everybody went through, and the side threads, which was trying to identify specific barriers, not a lot of folks are visiting those. So we were trying to figure out why, and is it an awareness issue? Are a lot of people just not aware of certifications? Negative perceptions popped up on our survey as suspected, and then we found folks that didn't use certifications. Again, it did seem from our survey that they needed some assistance. On the recycling side, there seemed to be some benefits to having a recycling contract or policy, which we explored. We tried to look at the link between folks who handle procurement being involved in the recycling process, and also on recycling, awareness around those certifications as well. And after conducting those interviews, what it ultimately came down to is these seem to be really the major barriers that effective best management practices are facing. That while these certifications can be very, very useful, there's a very large lack of awareness on the part of most businesses that those certifications even exist. And for those who are aware of them, there seem to be negative perceptions, and I'll talk about those in a bit. And something got grayed out there, but on recycling, also those certifications, there was a lack of awareness as well. And again, we consulted with our advisory committee throughout this process, and that seemed to ring true to them as well, based on our survey results and the interview results. What this pie chart shows us is we took a look at the reasons that respondents don't use registrations or certifications, and I'm going to take my glasses off here for a second, but 40% said that they were not aware of the certifications prior to our survey. 25% said that they felt that not enough products were included in these registries and certifications. 15% said they were difficult or confusing to use. 8% said that the products that are certified cost more, and 5% said they were not reliable. Then there was an other category. But those are the reasons that people said that they, again, were either not aware of or had negative perceptions around the certifications. So again, what the emerging theme from all of this is that most of our respondents are not aware of registries and certifications, and those that are have persistent negative perceptions. So we thought, how are we going to break through this barrier and inform people about these certifications and help dispel some of these negative perceptions? So we decided to rely on a presentation. And as it turned out, at the Delta Institute, we are also managing the Chicago Green Office Challenge for the City of Chicago. And in June, which was right around this time, was Recycling Month for the Chicago Green Office Challenge. So this is a competition that pits Chicago companies against each other to try to become more sustainable, and they earn points for different challenges. So we decided to do the presentation at the Chicago Green Office Challenge event for June, on June the 18th. We had 25 distinct companies attending. It was about 50 attendees. This was held at PepsiCo's headquarters. And so that was one method. And then we also wanted to compare and contrast that to what if we videotape this presentation? Would that be as effective as presenting it live? And so folks at the presentation received points if they recommended other people to view the webinar. So that helped to drive people to watch that webinar or video. And then to beta test which method was more effective, the live presentation or the video presentation, we had people who came to the presentation text on their phone answers to this question: are you familiar with certifications and registrations for purchasing and recycling electronics? And they could say yes or no. And then after, we asked them, are you more likely, less likely, or just as likely, no impact, to using these certifications now that we kind of walked you through them. So that's how we beta tested the two strategies. And I'll talk a little bit more at this later. Quickly run through some of the basics of the presentation that we gave. We ran through the two main recycler certifications. These are R2 and eSteward. So what R2 and eSteward are trying to guarantee is that if you give your electronics as a business to one of these recyclers, they're going to be recycled safely using good health and safety practices. They're not going to be shipped overseas to a developing country that is least able to manage these electronics, and a few other guarantees as well. And then we compared and contrasted R2 versus eSteward. eSteward is more stringent than R2. R2 will allow export of electronics as long as they're going back into the commodity stream, so as long as they're going to be reused. But they cannot be exported if they're going to be recycled, disassembled. However, eSteward does not allow any export of electronics. eSteward also is focused on more electronic waste types overall, whereas R2 is focused more on CRT, glasses, batteries, the items that are mentioned up there. And then what we did is we brought the websites up and we walked them through the websites and kind of showed them step by step how they could find an R2 or eSteward certified recycler. Then we did the same thing with the NADE certification, which stands for National Association of Information Destruction. And so some electronics recyclers have this NADE certification that guarantees that your data is going to be secure. So we all have concerns about when we recycle a laptop or a desktop, anything with a hard drive, what happens with that data? And that's a very valid concern. And most R2 and eSteward recyclers are going to handle that data very securely, but if they're also NADE certified, that's an extra level of security. And just we talked about folks in terms of if your recycler is not NADE certified, what are some of the questions that you need to ask? And some of those are, what data sanitation program are you using? So some folks may not realize typically what's involved is a 3-pass system where the recycler will overwrite your data first with a 1, then a 0, then a random digit. And that is what erases your data. How many passes does it involve? Government sometimes requires up to 11 passes in some cases. Typically 3 passes are sufficient. Do you get documentation from your recycler? If not, you should be. And a couple other things. Can you be present during the destruction? Some government entities want to be present for that. And then again, we walk them through the NADE website to show them this is not difficult to find a NADE certified recycler. And we just went step by step with them to kind of show them how to use the website. And then we did the same thing with the main purchasing certification, which is EPEAT. That, again, stands for Electronic Products Environmental Assessment Tool. So this is a registry to identify electronic products that have characteristics that make them much easier to recycle. Also, these products will have less hazardous materials in their construction. They might be made of recycled content. They could have less packaging. There's a variety of characteristics that make them more environmentally friendly and easier to recycle. And so we tried to kind of lock in some of this information using some visuals. If you use EPEAT certified electronics, if the whole country used them, we could reduce the use of primary materials equivalent to 14 Empire State Buildings, reduce toxic materials equal to 266 elephants, just anything to put a visual to get people to really understand how important and how impactful this certification can be. And we also walk them through how products are registered on the EPEAT registry. There is an audit process, there is a review process for the materials sent in by the manufacturer to help them to understand that this is a regulated process. And so these were the negative perceptions, again, that we were trying to reduce. The website is difficult to use, and with all the certifications, we tried to show them hands-on how easy it is to use the website. The registrations are not reliable. Again, going through that auditing process for EPEAT, we're trying to show them that they are reliable. Not enough products are registered. We walked them through. There's tons of electronics on the EPEAT website. Dell, HP, all the big users, and even a lot of the small producers are there. And that registered products cost more. We pulled up some information from the EPEAT website and compared 2 product lines to show folks that the prices are not prohibitive. And again, we walk them through the whole EPEAT website. And then to further lock in information, we did this little EWaste Jeopardy thing where we tested people to see how much they remembered from our presentation. And we asked them some questions like this one. These are characteristics of what? And the answer is, these are the characteristics of products, electronics that are EPEAT registered. And we asked them, who are the 2 major recycling certification programs? And of course, everyone here knows they are R2 and eSteward. And they won $5 Starbucks gift cards for answering. And a final way to lock in that information was we presented a challenge. if anybody who saw the live presentation could include electronics in their purchasing policy, so a requirement to use EPEAT, they earned extra points. And we had, I think, 3 or 4 companies who did that. And then we reviewed the text responses. So I will let you know we had a little bit of a technical glitch on our texting, and the texting didn't come through. So then we asked folks from the presentation if they could email us their responses. So about, maybe half or so responded. And while not super scientific, because the texting is anonymous and it didn't work, what we found is of the 11 who did respond via email, the 11 of the 25 participants, 2/3 had never heard of the certifications before coming to our presentation. And afterward, almost all of them said they would be more likely to use the certifications after seeing the presentation. For the video presentation, the video version, unfortunately nobody texted us. So, that's information in and of itself. We did have 38 hits to the video, but we also discovered is that even if folks just go into the video and don't view the whole thing, it records as a hit. But we did have about a half a dozen folks email the administrators of the Chicago Green Office Challenge and let them know they had viewed the video. So we weren't able to do as apples to apples comparison as we would like, but I think what we got from this is that we believe the live presentation is more effective than video, which probably isn't a surprise to anybody. And maybe people text more in the live presentation because you have someone like me in front encouraging people to do this. So live seemed to be a better venue. So we had 3 recommendations that came out of this overall project. Number 1, that we need to identify strategic communication opportunities and awareness. So there has to be a lot more information to Illinois businesses that these certifications are out there, and again, dispelling those negative perceptions to get folks to use them. Number 2, develop cross-promotional strategies for best practices. What we noticed is on the EPEAT website, they never mention any of the recycler certifications, and the same with R2 and eSteward, the recycler certifications. They never mention EPEAT. And we have the most effective electronics management when we marry those 2 things. So if we could somehow get these folks to cross-promote each other, that would really leverage the benefits. The 3rd recommendation is to identify opportunities to link best practices to incentives. So what we mean by this is, for instance, the LEED certification program for buildings, which stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. You can receive points for credits if you engage in recycling in your company. But electronics are never really mentioned very much, except for using energy efficient electronics. So could we get EPEAT, use of EPEAT or the recycler certifications, R2 and eSteward, could we get some LEED points for that? So again, trying to leverage groups that are out there to really promote electronics recycling and effective best management purchasing strategies. And so that's the end of my presentation. And does anybody have any questions? No? And now I know everybody's going to go home in their basements and get their TVs out, right? And take them to a recycler. Oh.
And please repeat the question. And the second question is, EPEAT, U.S. national program or is it international program?
EPEAT is national. Yeah, it's created by the Green Electronics Council. Is that right? Yes.
Regarding the negative perceptions towards the EPEAT certification program, do you think that perception is general towards all certification, or is it specifically EPEAT? Because did you try to educate the companies about how these certification programs are developed? Some of them are more consensus-based, transparent, inclusive.
So that's a very good question. The question is, did we look into whether these negative perceptions are just around EPEAT, R2, eSteward? Is that a consensus around green certifications in general? And then, I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Did you do any follow-up to sort of talk to them about how these certifications
And did we talk to folks about how these certification programs are developed? So what we did find out from some of our interviewing was that there is sort of a gut reaction towards green certifications, that they probably cost more, right? We know that recycled paper costs more than virgin paper. And so I think that is a broader perception around green certifications in general. And in terms of trying to explain to them the process for these certifications, again, we were focused on the electronic ones. But for EPEAT, we did, I only had one slide up there, but we did talk to them at length a little bit about how the process actually works, how material has to be submitted by the manufacturer, and then it's reviewed and vetted, and then there may be an audit that occurs. The same thing, for instance, with NADE. That one is actually very stringent, that there are surprise audits that occur, and I believe half of the NADE certified organizations are certified each year. So every other year approximately, you might be getting, it might be getting audited. And then there are surprise audits as well. And with R2 and eSteward, there is a process also. So we did attempt to walk folks through that and give them a greater comfort level that these certifications are certifying what they're supposed to. This isn't greenwashing, that that they do represent practices and products that are green. Yes?
I have a question concerning F2 on EWaste. You are based in F2 2008 or F2 2013? Because right now, F2 2013, for instance, like EWaste, you can export things in other countries. If they have, like the computer, for instance, if they have been tested working, you are able to export EWaste. And from F2 right now, F2 2013, you need to be ISO 2.
Oh, ISO 14001 for R2?
Or like you need at least to have like an EPEAT certification.
Okay. So the comment was, I hope I get correct me if that with R2 you can export, right? Is that what you're saying? I think
Yes, with EWaste you can too.
with eSteward?
Yes, if like the components, if like electronic waste are tested working.
So under certain circumstances, that export is allowed under eSteward?
Yes, on F2 is.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, it was from our research, it was our perception that no exporting was allowed, but thank you for that clarification.
Other question?
Yes?
If I work for a company that already recycles all their e-waste, so I guess for purchasing something that's EPEAT certified, how would that help a company that's already recycling all their electronic waste?
Well, I mean, if you're purchasing EPEAT certified, there's a couple of things that come out of that. Sometimes it can be very difficult for the recyclers to disassemble an electronics, depending on how many tabs, how many different types of screws are used for that piece of electronics. And so there are some cases where they simply, based on the economics of the situation, may not be recycling some electronics, or it really cuts into their profit margins because an electronic, for instance, that uses one or two types of screws could take, a half hour to disassemble versus something with multiple different types of tabs, multiple different types of fasteners and screws could take 2 hours. So there's more incentive for recyclers to continue to recycle if they're working on products that are easier to recycle. Also, with EPEAT, you're likely to have less hazardous materials in your electronics. So again, an electronic product that has hazardous materials versus one doesn't, both, yes, can be recycled, but again, that represents an additional cost to the recycler to have to manage those hazardous contaminants. And I would also just add to this too, if you're already recycling your electronics, it sounds like you're pretty on top of this. Some of your electronics may already be EPEAT certified. So you might want to check into that because that's something that you can promote for your company. Then in addition to recycling, you purchase EPEAT, you're trying to purchase green electronics. And from a sustainability perspective, that's just a good message to put out there to other companies.
Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you very much, Margaret.
Thank you.